What's up, everybody? Caleb coming at you again with another video that's been requested on how I mix my live drums for a full band. So I'm going to go through and show you how I get to this sound. I love that sound. That's pretty big. I love it. It fits well with the song. So we're going to go through. I'm going to turn all the plugins off and I'll be right back. So the big sound that you just heard, this is actually the raw, untouched file. These are just WAV files put in with no effects or no processing done. This is what it sounds like. So we have a lot of work to do. But here we go. We're going to start off with the kick drum. We're going to go through each instrument here, and we're going to go through, and I'll show you how I get the sound that what do. So here we go. We're going to go through. So I've added an HE like this. You know, kind of boxy, just, you know, it has a punch though, so it has that nice attack that we're looking for. So what I've done is added an HEQ. I just like the way it scoops. And I take out about just a couple of decibels or so off of about 150 or so, it looks like, just to get rid of the boxy sound like this. I like the way it sounds. Now next up, it's nothing crazy. Okay, so this next one is CLA drums. It's always my go-to every single time. Favorite plugin. Now it's just faders with kind of preset sounds, and you kind of just tweak until you're liking. So I've put a hard gate on it to get rid of any snare or overhead sound that we're not looking for. A reverb, I did a studio reverb. It's a small sound, a little bit of a room sound almost, instead of there's a club and a hall setting. Don't want those, it's too big. A pushing compressor, there's also spank and wall. So there's a little more, those are a little more like squashing. I like push because it just kind of pushes the envelope. Bite and lower, just for a little EQ, and I've cranked those up pretty high, as you can see. You know, don't be afraid to mess with the sound, even if it looks wrong. You know, get it to where you like it, to where it sounds good. Okay, so when you do that and you add the CLA drums, it sounds like this. It's really tight, has nice attack, great gate, a little bit of that reverb, and the top end, a little compression, just to push it. You know, I love the way it sounds. So now there's no low end to that at all. So this is where sampling comes in. Ableton has a feature where if you right click on any track, this is a drum track, it reads, you can go down here and go convert drum to new MIDI track. It will literally convert the hits of each drum of the track you selected, basically the loudest ones, and it will read it and print it into a MIDI note that matches the same exact time space as that. So what I've done on this second kick section is I picked a kind of a sound that I like to sample, loaded it into this trigger spot down here, and it's kind of a dance kick pretty much. And what I did is just rolled off all the high end because I don't want it to sound like a, you know, dance deep house music. I just wanted it to have the low end kind of scoop that we're looking for. So I rolled off all the way up until about 200 or so is what sounded good to me. And this is what the sample kick sounds like. You can hear it's just a thump, just a really low thud. So when you add both of those together, it sounds pretty good. Yeah, and you kind of get that low sound that you're looking for, and you have a rounded out kick drum. Okay, so next up, the wonderful world of snare drums. Here is the raw, just top snare drum, is what it sounds. Yeah, it's a Black Beauty Ludwig snare, great snare. Nothing crazy about this actual recording, just an SM57 mic. So what we're gonna do is put a little EQ. I rolled off just a hair to make sure I didn't get any kick drum or toms, you know, because I don't want any extra low end that I don't want. Now, most snare drums are going to have this mid-range that has a note to it. Like you can hear this overtone resonant note. So the idea is you want to get rid of that so you hear mostly just the sound of the actual head being hit, you know. You don't really hear a note or anything. because that'll distract from vocals and guitars, because that's what the range is. It's always going to be anywhere from 700 to like 1100 in this range. And so this one was about at 1K. And I just kind of scooped that out a little bit, a pretty good bit, about 5 decibels back, just to get rid of that unwanted sound. And then I added SSL channel strip, best plugin ever. It has an amazing gate, amazing compression dynamic. It's good stuff. So I put a little bit of compression on it, not too much, because I wanted to do more on a different plugin. Very, very heavy gate, high range all the way up, threshold pretty much all the way up, because you get a lot of hi-hat bleed over and cymbals and toms and everything. So you want to eliminate as much as you can. Now, what I've done is, again, I'm not shy with my EQ, with compression and everything too. So I crank up about 8K, get the nice sparkle on the top, crank up a good 3K or so. For this snare, it just kind of had this good tone to it. I like the way it cut. And I've actually boosted about 2.5K even a little bit. I could probably skinny that up a little bit more, the actual way that it's going to happen. And then I've actually boosted on, you can see I'm using this to boost, not cut. Now what I do is around 300, I've boosted a good amount just to get the low end, because I kind of like the way that it sounded. So everything is all about relative. It's all about you and how you like your sound. This is what it sounds like. Without, with. Yeah, you can hear it just, it's all about tightening it up and making it sound as studio as possible, because you don't want a lot of bleed over if you can help it. So here's the big question. How do you get the giant snare like all these other places? Well, again, it's all about the sampling and layering light touches of everything. Now, what I like to do is I start with the same thing. You right click, convert drums to new MIDI, and it'll convert these hits here to a MIDI track. And you can load sample snare drums that you like and find into the actual rack. So I have 3 different snare samples, and I'm not crazy. Some people have more than that. So we're gonna go and start with number 1. This is like an 80s snare. It's just a big kind of, it has a sustain. I like my snare to have a very good like sustain. I don't like it to just like a piccolo snare or something that just kind of goes. I like it to have like a nice. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna play the first sample, and what it sounds like is this. Yeah, okay, so it's pretty simple. Kind of like the way it sounds, That's kind of a standard. That one has more of the space and sustain. I put an SSL on it, cranked the low end up to put a nice full sound to it, put a little bit of 10K around, cranked up, and then I cut some of that mid-range I was talking about, actually around 900, cut that out because it was kind of boxy. It's electronic, so you don't need a gate, and then a very, very, very extremely light compression. And so actually what I did was on all of them, I think, was add the Verb Suite classic reverb plugin to the actual track instead of on a return. I liked the way it sounded. It just added this cool kind of thing, made it sound like it was in an actual room instead of just like processed with reverb. So I'll play that with the reverb now. So without that, with. It just sounds cool. I like the way it sounds. I'm happy with it. Okay, so now we're going to go to snare number 2 here. This is more of a dance snare. This is more of just a low-end thud that we're looking for, like a thump, like a doom, So I'll play that regular, like this. It's very tight, very easy. It's a dance snare. Why would you want a dance snare? It's all about adding together. Don't think of it as a dance snare. Think of it as playing a low end part to a really big snare sound that you're achieving. Okay, so the EQ on this is crazy. Around 250 or so. I cranked up literally 12 to 15 decibels. Like, I'm not shy. Cut that same mid range that was nasty. I wanted this to have all the low end, to give as much low end as possible, without destroying anything. A little bit of high end, not too much. Boosted a good bit around 6K. Light compression, again, no gate needed. And it sounds like this. Great. Love the way that sounds. And that's providing. So when you add these two together, it sounds like this. Then you add the top snare mic. It's already sounding pretty good. But there's this one last secret. And this one I started doing recently. I found this one other sample that I really, really love. And it's amazing. And I'm going to play it right now. So this is the last sample. Man, that is a thrash of a hit. You can definitely hear what that adds. Now, what I did was when I drug in that sample, it was a little too high pitched for me. It had a note to it. Right here is a transpose button. So I'm going to go back to 0. This is actually what it sounded like before. I was like, not really a huge fan, you know, and this is actually without, let me turn the reverb off. This is the real sample. So I knew I had a little work to do on it, but I just loved, it sounds like the snares are rattling and really loose. And I said, I don't like how high it is. So I lowered it until it sounded good. So I went down 5 whole half steps on the transpose until I got this. I was like, that's pretty good. And so the last thing was just doing a little EQ to it. So boosting on more of the low end, because it honestly doesn't do that much. It's not as much low end as you think it is. And that's pretty much all I did. And then I cut the same around that, 800-900 range. And then you kind of get this. And then all I do is add that little short reverb in there. And then you get this. So that's a pretty big thing. So when you add, let me go to the bottom snare. So the bottom snare mic is just adding a little bit of high end, it's just as simple like this. Nothing crazy. It's just you get that actual attack sound. So I just add an EQ and then I added a phaser. The top and bottom mic I think were out of phase, so I just fixed it. You just put a phaser plug in and choose which side. So I did a little bit of high end. I actually add low end a lot of times to my bottom snare mics. That's a trick I like to use. For some reason, I feel like it just makes it not so thin, because I don't like anything sounding piercing. I like a smooth mix. That's what I love. So with that together, it sounds like this. Okay, so I'm gonna add all the snares together, all 24 of them. So this is what your snare sounds like now. I'm pretty pleased with that. That's a massive snare. That is the trick and the secret. Next up is toms. So the tom is super, again, simple. It's just all easily recorded, and it sounds like this. This is tom. This is the rack tom. Yeah, nothing crazy. So this is just a simple chain. I did this on the rack and the floor tom, just changed a little bit of EQ basically. So I go on, I like it to have a nice attack on the top, but I don't want it, again, it's almost like a snare. You don't want that note, that boxy mid note to it. For this type of music, it tends to cut a lot and cut through. So I like it to have a nice bottom end though. So you're basically just scooping out a pretty good amount of mid. So I'm boosting the 10 and the 4.5K range, taking out a ton of about 750 or 7 or so, taking out like almost 12 decibels. It's a lot, but that's just what sounds good to me. You hear more of the head instead of, again, the note. So with that, it sounds like this. And a super heavy gate as well to get rid of any unwanted. Just like I did earlier on some of the snare things, I added the Verb Suite plugin, the reverb, to the actual track. Dialed back the dry wet about 35%. Nothing crazy, just like a 1 second room kind of sound, a little EQ boost, more of the high range, because I like it, a short reverb that sparkles, and it kind of helps it sound really, really cool. So that sounds like this. See, it kind of almost has a little bounce to it. And then last but not least is CLA drums. put it on Tom's Windex preset. It's got all these kind of different presets. Presets are awesome again because you kind of get to see how other people pick that preset and how they created it and how they got to that sound. So it's really cool. Presets are always the way to go, and then you tweak from there. So all I did was put the sub is on. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing, but I feel in my spirit, honestly, that it just does a little bit of something just to thicken it up, just a hair. I could be crazy, but I'm leaving it on. A little bit of top end. I didn't like the bite. It was a little bit too bitey, I guess, if that makes sense. The top end was more of a sheen, around 12K, I'm guessing, just to add a little bit of that sparkle. No compression. We have a little bit of that in the SSL. A little bit on the studio reverb, a short reverb. Sounds good to me. And it sounds like this. Yeah, tightens it up, gets rid of even more of the mids, honestly. And then I just did the same thing, pretty much mirrored on the low tom. So the low tom alone sounds like this. Pretty plain. So you add the SSL. So I'm boosting, again, the low end, taking out some of the mids, and then boosting around 10K to get that nice hit. Adding the Verb Suite. And then you add CLA. And it just kind of has a cool sound. I just like the way it happens. So the toms together. Yeah, I like the way it sounds. So last but not least are the overheads. So your overheads now, last but not least, these have a little bit of a trick to them. And I'll give you the tip that I always use, even in a live full house setting. An EQ, I roll off a little bit of low end just to get in any tom and kick, just to make sure that it's not gonna boom or anything. So I roll off just a little bit, not even to 100. And you see I actually take out some high end. It's not the kind of high end you're thinking. It's not rolling off, because if you roll like this, so if you take and you roll off the top, you're going to lose any sparkle you have. If you're just dipping out, you don't want your cymbals to be piercing. If you ever find you're in a live setting and you're like, oh, my ears hurt, something is like piercing and harsh, it's usually cymbals and guitar, stuff like that, And what I'm doing is I took it around, 5.39. I felt that it was a little bit harsh, and so I just dipped it down a good bit on both. We have just a right and a left, and they were in phase, so they're good to go. And then simply adding a CLA drum. And this is the cool part. If you're wondering how to get an overall glued together sound on your drums, what you do is compress the heck out of your overheads. It just adds a glue together sound. So on the CLA drums, I put the spank compress and turned it up a pretty good amount from the bottom. And what it does, it kind of pushes the envelope more and has more of like a really, really high threshold, very fast attack. And it spanks. I mean, you can hear it like it is like squashing the sound, but it sounds really good. It makes those sound glue together. A little top, a little lower, and a little bit of the hall reverb. So it's actually a longer reverb, makes it sound bigger. And when it all sits in the mix, it's good to go. And the last thing is a side chain compression. I don't know what a compression is. So on both, I've done exactly that, and they're identical. So sidechain compression, if you don't know, is simply a trick that you hear a lot of times in dance music. I'm going to do this weird example right now with my mouth. But when you hear dance music and you hear when the kick drum, you have that big, deep kick drum coming in, and you have a synth that's like a big dance synth that's coming out, and it's ducking when the kick drum's like that. That's what sidechain compression is. So it's taking the signal of let's say the overhead, and it's going to duck out when you choose to send audio from I'm going to do the kick drum. The kick drum can always get lost in the mix because of cymbals and snare and tom, everything else, and guitars and keys. So there's something going on. You want it to cut through. So what I do is send the compression to, I'm not actually compressing it, I'm just sending the audio from this compressor to the kick drum. So basically once the kick drum plays, this sound of the overheads will duck out, and you can choose kind of how much with this gain knob right here, how much it'll duck out. And so when you compress them and you do everything you need to do to them, it sounds like this. Yeah, I love the way it sounds. You can hear when the kick drum's in, it kind of ducks out a little bit and lets it take over. It's great. So now, last but not least, we're going to play the full product. So you have all of that. I'm going to turn the drum reverb on. I did nothing crazy, just kind of a short, medium kind of, it's a Verb Suite Classic again. It's what I always use typically. Less than a second. It's like a large chamber sound. Did some EQ, took out some mid and low because I didn't want it to cut through too much, but I wanted highs for a little sparkle. Sounds really good, nothing too crazy. Just a hair on the chorus effect. I kind of like the way it sounds, and makes it warble a little bit. And that is what you get, is this sound. So that's it, guys, for this. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you got some tips that you can use for anytime you're mixing in the future or mixing, in-house. It's all kind of the same principle as far as EQs and everything go. And I'll tell you, the last thing that I do is I group all my drums together and I put them in one group, and then I put a limiter on the whole group. And what it does, it's a gluing effect, and it helps the whole drum set sound put together in one track instead of all separate things. So I just did a little bit. The ceiling took out almost a couple decibels, and then the threshold just down like 2.3 or so, just enough to kind of, you can feel it pump just a little bit. And that's what happens with this, and that's how I get my sound overall. Hope you've enjoyed, and I will play it one more time. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and like, and I'll do my best to make another video for any of your questions. See you guys later.